Will we tackle this Carrick on Shore witch, Eamon?
I guess we're gonna have to. Will I start the ball rolling?
Yeah, guest on the podcast, Tom O'Mahony's actually from up around that neck of the woods, I think. He might be able to tell us about a few witches in Carrick on Shore at some point.
I can imagine. Yeah, Tipperary is where they eat their young, so that's what we're looking at here. Okay, a witch in Carrick on Shore. Carrick on Shore, by note, very popular for stag parties and hen parties. So,
indeed,
is there a sense of supernatural energy in the air? Who knows? Hopefully all those marriages worked out. So the Tipperary Free Press records a most remarkable case of hallucination in the good old town of Carrick on Shore. The actor being a grand old dame rejoicing in the name of Miss Mary Doheny, and her principal victims of delusion at present being none other than two members of HM Constabulary Force, as revealed in the magisterial inquiry.
I should briefly interject here and say that the source that Tim had was a newspaper scan, and I was able to get a text from image type of thing where it pulled all the text. Now,
there's a few bits and bobs.
Yeah, I went over it as good as I can, but the punctuation is a bit tricky at times, and some of the wording, it's not that it's wrong, but it's just that from this time the wording is kind of weird, you know.
Yeah, it is from the Waterford News.
From the Waterford News.
In Waterford, they talk weird anyway, so yeah, it's
they
kind
do.
of that.
16th of September. 16th of September, 1864. This is from.
Yeah, so it's kind of very, very old style language.
Yeah. Half, like a lot of my DNA comes from Waterford, so I should be able to manage this.
Yeah, for sure.
So Mrs. Doheny, for past years, lived in affluent circumstances by selling love potions to romantic and foolish girls. While she occasionally netted respectable sums amongst farmers' wives with whom things were not going altogether smoothly, Sub-Constable Joseph Reeves has outlived the first buddings of youthful enthusiasm. This is a great line. He is a married man of some 45 years of age, 45 we would say nowadays, and the father of a family. Some time ago, his eldest daughter became ill, and hearing of the curative powers of Mrs. Doheny, his wife engaged her services, and the child improved somewhat.
So, you know, what you reckon an Irish love potion is? A few pints of Guinness?
A bottle of Buckfast, yeah.
Yeah, a bottle of Buckfast to get you in the mood. You ever had Buckfast, Tim?
No, I don't even know.
Don't do it, Tim. Don't do it.
It's made by monks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so, I think it was like originally made by monks. Now it's made like by lads in factories.
Or was it druids? It was monks, was it?
It was monks, because it was back in the day when you couldn't drink water. Water was so full of disease that people had to drink. Yeah, effectively. We had to drink E. coli. We had to drink alcohol, but the monks used to make Buckfast, which they called a tonic. So basically, if you have a shot of Buckfast a day, it's meant to be quite good for your body. If you drink a bottle of Buckfast before a night out, it's not good for anything. But we used to, me and Rob's cousin, and I think Rob, you were probably there a couple of times.
Yeah, maybe once or twice. Yep.
We used to go. There's trawlers where we live, so we used to go out and sit on the trawlers and drink bottles of Buckfast. All our buddies when we were young, and then after that we'd go out and we'd have a couple of pints. And by the time we got to the pub, Buckfast is like an alcoholic yop. Like an alcoholic yogurt drink.
Oh, really?
And it's just, oh man, it's not good. It's really bad. It messes you up more than a bottle of wine or something like that would, for whatever's in it. But we used to do that regularly when we were kids, and yeah, so it's a fun night, but maybe a night where questionable decisions might be made.
So is there dairy in it? Like, when you say like yogurt, is it? Like...
There's a thickness to it. I don't know if it's dairy, but it's much thicker than like a high, like a sherry, for example. It's way thicker than a sherry.
Yeah, port vibes as well, doesn't it? It's it's that kind of really. It's like it's almost syrupy because it was made by monks in Buckfast Abbey.
Yeah.
So that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
You know what it is that's in it? Caffeine. That's what it is. So it wires you. It gives you a different buzz altogether. Like so,
caffeine and alcohol. Yeah,
it's like kind of a meme in like places like Scotland that people that drink Buckfast are just going to end up fighting you because they're so worked up on caffeine and alcohol. You know, it's like but yeah, it's an unusual drink for sure. No, you wouldn't want to be drinking a lot of it.
Very particular in my alcoholic drinks. I like a good hard cider.
Oh, okay, right.
Not so much on beer. Occasionally, if a good beer, okay. But usually not so much on that. Wine, okay. It depends on what, but wine will give me a headache sometimes.
Same, I don't. It's too acidic for me. It just burns a hole in my stomach if I try to drink it.
I wanted to, so fancy artists and stuff used to drink absinthe, And, And I wanted to be like, oh, I'm gonna like the absinthe is gonna be like I'm gonna drink absinthe. It'll be my thing. Oh, this is horrible.
The cool dude.
Disgusting tasting. It had nothing to do with absinthe.
No, it's not. I'm a whiskey man. It's kind of a cliche, I suppose, being Irish, but whiskey is probably my fave. I like a Scotch as well, but generally more into the Irish
the leathery taste of a Scotch, do you?
Yeah. See, the thing I discovered is my earlier experiences with Scotch was just the crappy, cheap Scotches, and they're very heavily peaty and kind of it's almost like perfumey. It's that overpowering. But if you get some of the nice distilleries in Scotland, because there's so many of them, there's some really nice ones. Like Cardew is really nice, is one I like a lot. But I think Scotch is a good one, and I like a lot of the American bourbons. I'm a fan of some of the American bourbons. They were tasty.
Even some of the spice tastes, the honey and the apple and all that sort of stuff. I can get behind that. But I mean, mostly I will drink anything.
You don't discriminate at all.
Yeah, I'm an equal opportunities alcohol employer. I'm all good.
When I was learning banjo, I was going all over like West Virginia and stuff, and going to these events where these people would gather and stuff, and I was at one of these events and somebody broke out jugs of moonshine. And I had heard horrible things about it. I don't know if it was this particular moonshine or if this is all moonshine in general. It was some of the best tasting whiskey I'd ever had in my life. It was
lovely.
Imagine,
lovely, just absolutely. It's very smooth. I see why people go blind, because they used to drink a lot of it.
I had a Irish poaching, which is moonshine basically. It's called poaching there, and I was drinking that at my girlfriend's parents' party or something, and the dad he busted out some, and it was made like in a bath type of stuff, but it was absolutely lovely, and I just sipped on it. Like I had a few drinks. And so for the rest of the night, I kind of just sipped on it, just to tip over, and it was a good drink. I really enjoyed it.
Speaking of making things in a bath, we'll get back to the story eventually.
This is Monster Fuzz as well, so the digressions are part of us. I'm Neil Digress Tyson.
There's the local sort of resort area down on the eastern shore of Maryland, Ocean City. And I would spend long periods of time there, and my sister lived there for a while. I lived there basically for a summer, even though I didn't have a home. I just bounced from place to place, and my different friends lived there for a while. I was there at one point, and this guy, just random people, just because it's like a resort area. You have a party, and just random people are just going to roll in. And this guy comes in, he's trying to sell me acid. And I was I either didn't have money. There's something about this guy that was just like, I don't know if I want to buy acid off this guy.
No.
And he all night he keeps coming to me. He's like, like come on, like $5 a tab. And I'm like, nah, I'm not. Like whatever, just I'm not interested. So at the end of the night, he ends up giving me like three sheets of this acid. Like,
sheets.
Good Lord.
And he's like, I've got a ton of it because my brother makes it in his bathtub.
Oh my god.
Okay. He's like, the thing is, you're supposed to use grain alcohol, but we couldn't get grain alcohol, so we used rubbing alcohol in the process.
Oh, no.
So I was like, I don't know about this. I never. I think I ended up re-gifting the sheet of acid.
Yeah, I think that was a good call.
That was a wise choice. Yeah.
So we're back to Sub Constable Reeves, and then the Miss Doheny here, and he was wanting to get into the curative powers and all that type of stuff. So henceforward, Miss Doheny became a frequent guest at the tea table of the constable, and after a time she predicted that ere long he would be in affluent circumstances, inasmuch as some of his relatives and connections who had been dead for years had come to life, and would soon be permitted to show themselves upon the earth. So she's promising the sun, moon, and stars there, really. Like, yeah. He was also led to believe that Sir James Power, who died some 10 years ago, took a deep interest in his well-being and purposed giving him some landed property. And the result was that a correspondence was carried on between them, and the constable received no less than 25 letters and a gold ring from the occupant of the grave, the missives in question being regularly forwarded to Miss Doheny, and the replies occasionally came through her and were sometimes found in an old moat on a hillside. So interesting stuff here with these little letters, right? She sort of just, I don't know what's going on with her, but to attest her power still further, she made an assignation with the constable to meet him in a certain field at a particular hour. And there she revealed to him the person of his father-in-law, Mr. Mullins, standing at a few yards distance, dressed in a blue coat and brass buttons, and knee breeches. Do you still wear breeches, Eamon?
Yeah, but mine will be fairly stinky breeches. You got stinky breeches.
Nice. So, coarse stockings and shoes. He was not allowed to address the vision, which was beheld by his son, a boy about 9 years of age, at the same time. So she also showed him others of his friends and company who had died, amongst others his son William, who had departed this life some 5 or 6 years ago. This the constable deposed on oath before the magistrates on Saturday. And as regarded her power in this respect, he was corroborated on oath by his wife. Mr. Hannah, who with Mr. Jepson and Wilson presided, asked him if he had been drinking at the time.
Drinking that bath puching.
Yeah. And the man replied that he had not tasted spirituous liquors for the past 21 years. This appears strange, to be sure, but then there is further testimony. Sub-Constable Hayes is brought forward, and he deposes on oath that the woman has brought up before him several of his friends and connections who had been dead for years. And in this statement, he also corroborated by his wife. So there's two people basically backing each other up here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. It's kind of hard to decipher exactly what's going on. He said he hasn't drank in 21 years, and he's talking about ghosts and apparitions. But the people are saying, this is strange to be sure. And in Ireland, that's like a man not to drink for 21 years.
Yeah, that's stranger than the ghost. Yeah,
for sure. For weeks after, Mrs. Doheny is supplied with meal, potatoes, tea, etc., for the sustenance of the dead who have come to life. And on more than one occasion, some tobacco was sent to old Mullins, who it appears was in his lifetime a great smoker.
Is this like when you leave the cookies out for Santa?
I mean,
and
it's
the parents eat them.
This is to me. This sounds like, as a folklore guy, this is spirit gifting, you know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Totally. My parents used to have a fight every Christmas about Santa Claus gifting. My dad would be like, "Oh, Santa Claus would probably like 4 cans of Guinness," and my mum be like, "No, the cookies and the carrots are fine," and he'd be like, "No, I think Santa wants Guinness." And because we were kids, we wanted to please Santa. Like we'd be like, "Yeah, let's give him the Guinness." So my mother always, wasn't until we were a bit older that we realized, oh, he's a high functioning alcoholic. that's a different thing. Nice. So to meet these demands, Constable Reeves got into debt, but the promise of gold and landed property included him to resort to extensive credits to furnish supplies. New potatoes were at one time returned to him with a request from the dead that they should be exchanged for old. And on one occasion, some eggs were sent back with word that they had not agreed with the dead son, William.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Picky spirits.
Yeah, because new potatoes are like over here, you know, we know our potatoes, you know.
We do.
And new potatoes are quite desired. So I think that was a piss take, you know, because we love our new potatoes as soon as they come into season.
We never hand back. We actually have we had the whole argument about chips versus fries, but to keep with our vernacular, we have a chipper over here, and they have a poster in the window every time there's new potatoes, and they're like, now cutting new potatoes, and we're like, nice. never mind that curry I was gonna have, it's time for new potatoes. Mr. Hurd, sub-inspector, at length got word of what was going on, and he determined to make inquiries in reference thereto. Weaves was removed to Clonmel in consequence of the debts he had contracted, and learning the cause thereof, he proceeded to Miss Doheney's house, where he found the letters from Sir James Power, which she had returned by Reeves when the thing got noised abroad. He also got 3 bottles containing tea, cream, and milk made up in a clean white handkerchief, of which Mr. Doheney acknowledged were to have been forwarded to some of her defunct clients on the same evening.
That's an interesting one, right? I know that tea back then in Ireland, if you had tea, you were probably fairly affluent, I would say. I do know from anecdotes of my grandparents as well, because they were around in, say, the 30s, 40s. It was very hard to get tea here then, you know? So I think if they had tea back in 1860 something, they were a very well-off family, you know?
Yeah. Well, I know my mother definitely in the 50s used to get like oranges for Christmas and stuff like that, because getting fruit was much more difficult.
Yeah. Like they only released bananas and oranges in Ireland in the 50s.
Yeah, banana downloadable content. Yeah.
Yeah, they did, yeah. So the house was otherwise comfortably furnished, and the dame appeared to live well on the credulity of the people. Excuse me. She was, of course, arrested, and the present proceedings were instituted. It was a strange thing to witness in a public court of justice, a number of intelligent people, apparently in their senses, deposing to such things on oath in the presence of magistrates. Whatever spells she may have wrought, there is no question of doubt but that the policeman named and her family still place implicit faith in her, for when being removed to the dock, Reeves shook her by the hand and asserted such, and in reply to one of the magistrates, he said, "Sir, if you had seen as much as I have, you would be of the same opinion."
Classic Reeves.
So that's fascinating. That is fascinating.
It is, fair. Yeah, it really is.
So after taking down in writing Reeves's evidence, and he having signed the same, the magistrates were about to adjourn when Mr. Wilson, addressing Doheney, said, "Have you anything to say now that you have heard this statement?" The woman coolly replied, "He wanted to see his dead relatives, and, dead or alive or on horseback, I showed them to him." Mr. Hurd had the woman's husband, a blind man, arrested on Friday evening. He travels through the country led by a dark guide, and on being questioned, he acknowledged that his worst day's receipts for some time past were 2 shillings and some other currency that I don't know.
Okay, I'm glad that was. I saw that. I was like, I have no clue what that is.
Yeah, it's shillings anyway, for sure. I don't know the second.
Shillings and 9pence, is it?
Yeah,
like the D was that P back in the olden days.
That's another thing about my grandparents. They're still talking like shillings sometimes. I'm like, "Gran, I don't know what a shilling is." Like, they're like, "Oh, there was 5 shillings and 6 pence." And I'm like, "What does that mean? Is that 5,000 euro?"
I'm curious as to this dark guide.
The dark guide,
absolutely, yeah.
It's interesting. Like once we finish up this story here, myself and Eamon will we might be able to give you some Irishisms as to what that might mean.
Okay.
It's reminded me a little bit of the Appalachian shadow people that people said they saw on the pilgrimages.
You're going way more abstract.
I'm going way more. That's what I like to do.
Yeah, you're going way more abstract.
You're talking about absinthe. I'm Van Gogh, son.
Yeah. So while occasionally they realize 6 or 7 shillings in a day. So they were making good money, apparently. I must ask me Gran how much that is. She might be able to tell us. We learned that some time ago, the female prisoner gave a neighbouring woman an awful beating.
Oh, Lord.
And yet nobody could be got to prosecute her, fearing that she might bewitch them or their children. The prisoner is apparently about 40 years of age with a good-looking face. Like you, Eamon, actually.
Yeah, about 40 years of age. I wouldn't so much pass the good-looking face part, but about 40 years of age is probably on point. Yeah.
Though some what pass, and a mouth particularly expressive of cunning and intelligence. On September 8th, the prisoner who brought before Mr. L.H. Jeffson, J.P. and Mr. Hannah R.M. at the petty sessions at Carrick on Shore, and on a rehearing of the entire of the case, So they used to say the entire rather than the entirety. So that's interesting. She was committed for trial at the next quarter sessions at Clonmel for obtaining clothing and food under false pretenses.
Can't be trusted.
Right. So first question is to Tim. You're the outsider here, Tim. What do you think from reading this story?
Well, see, I have the advantage of having read the follow-up too.
See, I haven't read the follow-up either.
Yeah. You know, like I said, when I see things like spirit gifting that just kind of falls right in with folklore, part of me thinks like, well, there is something going on here, right? There is something going on here. So in the follow-up, it talks about her trial, and apparently her blind husband was dressing up as these people.
Oh, right.
Nice.
Which would explain why no one was allowed to address their dead relatives, right?
Yes.
But, you know, is there a both end thing going on here? I mean, you know, certainly, I think we tend to look back and think of, you know, our ancestors in the 1800s or whenever it is as being simple, you know, and like stupid, you know, in a sense, and that, like they were easily fooled. And I don't think that was as much the case as we think of now. I mean, certainly, you know, a good example to argue against what I just said is the Cottingley Ferry photos, if you're familiar with those.
Oh, yes.
They're silly. And you look at them, and any modern person looks at them and goes, they're paper cutouts. You know? Yeah. But at the time, photography was so new, and what photography showed people was real life, right? It showed you could take pictures of things and capture it. So I think part of that was the dawn of photography. You know, when people were used to seeing, you know, you could take a picture of whoever, you know, a portrait, and that was them. You know, that's how they looked, because photography, that's what it does. So I think that played into part of the thing with the Cottingley Ferry. I don't think it was like so much that people were more gullible back then. I think photography was new, and everything that they were being shown was you know, real stuff. So But, you know, that said, there is an element of maybe being a little more gullible as far as you know, special effects and so forth. So
I know one of the first it was a really early silent movie, but they had a part where someone got their head cut off by an axe or whatever, and obviously they did like a switch camera, so they have the actual actor lying there, and the executioner is throwing down the axe, and then they stopped the camera, obviously, and then put in like a dummy where he cut the head off the axe, or cut the head off the victim rather. But it was the first time that had ever been shown, and people in the audience believed that someone was so committed to cinema that they were willing to give their lives for this perfect scene that had never been seen before, you know?
There were stories of early silent movies of trains where they would film the train coming right at the camera, and people in the theater like diving out of their seats.
I remember.
Yeah. So I mean, for us, you know, I'm reading this and I'm thinking, okay, so there's another layer to it. It kind of sounds like she's acting like a bit of a medium, maybe a clairvoyant as well. She's kind of doing that whole thing. I don't know where you lie on it, Tim. Personally, I'm so conflicted on medium stuff, because sometimes I hear things and I'm like, you know what? It would be very hard to cold read that information. Like, you know, there's sometimes that people say stuff to me about it. I've even heard tapes myself that were pretty good. But then sometimes, you know, you see these. What's that documentary, Emma, that we've seen?
With Timmy in it. The near-death experience one. Yeah.
Have you seen this, Tim, on Netflix? It's a near-death experience documentary.
I'm not sure.
It's the first episode is really compelling. It's a bit like what kind of happens when you die, and it's basically people talking about their experiences as they died. Like, you know, like they were brought back to life, but they tell their stories, what happened to them, and it's quite interesting. But episode 2 goes down the sort of clairvoyant path, and this particular place that they were shot, because I was going into episode 2 and I was like, okay, episode 1 was great. Let's see, like, let's really get to the meat and potatoes of this whole thing here. And the clairvoyants in it were just really hacky and bad, and it kind of ruined it, because I've heard stuff that is way more compelling than what they were doing in the show, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah.
Yes. And this sounds like that. This does sound like it could have been compelling, but with the evidence that you have there in the second article, it kind of you're like, was it a bit of that kind of misleading, preying on families that had more money than sense? And trying to just get, because they were trying to get like tobacco and stuff as well, weren't they? It was one of the things that they requested, which that would have been a super exotic thing back then, because tobacco was a new world thing. So I mean, I have to imagine in Ireland at the time, getting tobacco would have been very difficult.
So with any kind of supernatural pursuit, paranormal pursuit, where you have to produce results, eventually, now this is my opinion, eventually you will come to hoaxing.
Yeah, true. Yeah,
I agree with that entirely,
because it's happened in some of the famous poltergeist cases where people where there was apparently something real going on, and then later on people started faking it. When these researchers would come in, or a reporter or something would come in, and they'd want to have these things happen while people were there, so they started faking it. Happens with Bigfoot people too. They'll initially produce some really good evidence, and then they have the pressure to keep producing, and that's when they start hoaxing. So my gut says that even if there was something real going on in the beginning with this, she literally has the pressure to keep producing results. And the same thing with these modern mediums. Maybe sometimes they're getting genuine information, but they are pressured to have constant results. And eventually they figure out ways to fake it, and they may be hoaxing themselves. I've always said it's pretty easy to do those readings on people. When you could tell somebody, oh, you're a creative person, and then everyone wants to be a creative person. So, yeah, I am. And you're a leader. People look up to you. Oh, yeah, that's true. You really know me. Tell people what they want to hear, and they'll think you're a genius. But but I think there's maybe there's a spark of the genuine thing, but then again there's this pressure to produce, which leads to hoaxing.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that as well. It brings to mind a small bit about Jesus, this is going a bit way off, but it's the first thing that came to mind, is that idea of the quantum, and that the possibilities are everywhere until you look at them, and then they solidify, if that makes sense. So so it exists, that there's like a cloud of quantum, if you like, and then as soon as it's measured, it chooses a destination, it chooses a spot that we can kind of observe. And I think maybe, to your point, Tim, for sure, that it's almost similar in terms of this high strangeness stuff, is that when someone's not actually trying to get something out of it, it presents itself. It's when you try to find it, it starts to become elusive. So I can totally understand why people who themselves know that something strange is happening here will, ultimately sort of fabricate something, because there's nothing really wrong with fabricating something when you've experienced something real.
Yeah, I suppose.
In their mind, anyway.
Yeah. And as long as you're not, if you're doing it and no one's getting harmed, then maybe if you're doing it and there's no money passing hands, it's different.
If you're not starting as a charlatan, you know what I mean? Like if you're taking money off, you're lying to take money. That's a different thing. But if you're hoaxing someone trying to study something, like I can understand that if you've experienced something that's real and you're like, this is real, I just need you to believe because I know I've experienced.
Yeah,
I can get that,
because I definitely think there's people that are sensitive to, like, their senses are attuned to stuff that other people aren't, and they can sense things, and even just on simple things like emotion. Like, there's people that are very good at sensing people's emotion and reading people, and sort of getting that invisible layer between two people and sort of really able to take it on. But I think it's a weird one. Sometimes when you see people that are grieving going to mediums, that's when I kind of feel it can be a little bit sketchy,
Oh yeah, for sure.
Because you're like, what's up with that?
Yeah. So what's the read on this dark guide that was leading her blind husband around?
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I'm not sure what the attitude was at the time, but I do know that people that travelled the country in Ireland at the time would have been our ethnic minority, which is travellers. So I wonder if perhaps, and I do think as well back then, a lot of travellers would have been into the clairvoyant and medium type of stuff. So I'm wondering, is that kind of it? But then I don't know how common or uncommon they were then. Like, I don't know if they would have been uncommon enough to put in quotations as a dark guide.
So travelers can be, but aren't necessarily Romany. Is that?
They're actually not at all. They're Irish.
Okay.
They look a lot like me, to be fair. It's
Eamon is kind of half
red
of
hair. I think if you go back a couple of generations, I've got some blood in me. Yeah,
it's Irish travellers, Irish gypsies are separate. So if you the most famous Irish gypsy right now is Tyson Fury. You know, he would be Irish gypsy blood that lives in England. He's be born and reared in England, like, but they're they're separate to Romany. You know, those guys are, I think, even genetically separate. I don't know. I'm not sure whether they all identify as the same group or whether they identify each other as different. I'm not actually quite sure.
I don't think so. I think the Irish ones, the original term we would say is they were tinkers, which is like, I think it's nowadays not the right thing to say, but the reason for it was that they would collect and fashion things out of tin and then sell them on. So that's where the name came from. I could be totally wrong, but I don't think that something from Clonmel in the 19th century would talk about, because travelers would have been that would have been way more prevalent back then than it is now. I don't think they would have called them dark guides. I think that dark guide has a, for me at least, because there's not a lot to go on here, but for me it's got the supernatural. There's something going on there, you know, for me, for sure. Like, because I've never heard that in Irish culture either, like a dark guide. I don't know.
Yeah, me neither. And that's the only reason I thought that it might be travelers, was because it goes out of its way to specify something different. And so I was like, well, you know, and I suppose it depends who writes this article as well. Like, because at the time it could have been an English paper. Yeah. So it could have been actually an English publication, which the wording at that time towards Irish people would have been very different as well.
Well, yeah.
So and travelers, maybe even in a derogatory way, could have been called a dark, in quotations, guide.
I think many more Irish people sort of would have been what we would call travelers nowadays back then, if that makes sense, because the I don't know how much differentiation there was between, you know, it's not like people were going around putting mortgages down on houses really easy back then. Do you know what I mean? This is like the time of the tenement house.
But they were the rag and bone men as well at the time. Yeah, that's what they were called.
That's true as well.
To be fair, it could have been a rag and bone man actually. And those guys were still going into the 30s and 40s. Like, again, to go back to my grandparents, because they were alive at that time, but my granny often remembers a rag and bone man, used to call it. She lived in she grew up in rural Meath, I think, in Ireland, and the rag and bone man would show up and like you trade like a fucking chicken for like you know, a few pints of milk or something like that kind of thing. So a rag and bone man, even them themselves had a kind of a dark sense to them, because there were these mysterious traveler people who, I don't think they were traveler like Irish travelers. I think they were separate again. But I'm wondering, is even one of them a type of a dark guide, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's so, because you're really just going off the words dark guide. It's so hard to know. For me, my feeling is that there's something, especially, you know, he travels through the country led by a dark guide. He's blind. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's actually just a dark guide is someone who guided the blind.
Yeah.
You know, I'm
that could be it too. Like, literally, someone that leads you through the dark, or guides you through your darkness.
But I mean, in the context of this story, which is so steeped in supernatural kind of elements, I don't know. You kind of think, is the dark guide something a bit more ethereal? So, like, is the dark guide not even a person or a thing, but he can somehow see, although he's blind? I mean, it's really hard to tell, but it's certainly an interesting read.
Yeah. And aside, one of my gateways into folk music was an album I picked up based on the cover called Songs of the Traveling People.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Ah.
And who was that from? Like, was the artist?
It was just various artists. It was field recordings.
Oh,
Done.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. So
Right.
it was very, very raw kind of stuff. But
Cool.
That sounds class.
So yeah, we're unsettled on the Tipperary witch. We'll have to consult Tom O'Malley.
I do know that my grandmother was from Clonmel. And I asked her. I remember I spend a lot of time with her when I was a kid. After my granddad died, I used to stay down there a lot. And I remember asking her one day, I was like, Nanny, when you die, will you come back and tell me what's going on after we die? And she was like, yeah, shut up, just eat your sweets and go to bed. But she never did. So, so I don't know how supernatural Clonmel is for sure.
Yeah, nice. So what have you got for us there, Tim? I'm very intrigued at the mystery.
So I found a Pennsylvania witch story.
Oh, very good.
This is from the Harrisburg Telegraph, February 4th, 1922.
Nice.
Let me get it to the size I can read it here. I'm reading off the screen. This hard-headed community, now this is the Pennsylvania Dutch, so that is an accurate assessment. This hard-headed community is about the last place anyone would think of as even giving any thought to such a thing as witchcraft. And yet, the other day, a friend, while looking up folklore of the lower Susquehanna, that's the Susquehanna River, would be the area in which I live, came across this article signed by WFR and written many years ago, which tells of what sounds like a remarkable story to us in this practical generation. And yet there are, in Dauphin County, barns which have certain peculiar markings and even crudely worded incantations to keep away the hex, as the height of witchcraft is called. It seems hardly credible nowadays, and yet not long ago, when I asked a farmer why he did not cross off some marks, he laughed and said they had always had them. All this only goes to show how witchcraft beliefs of the old days led to popular superstitions and even firm convictions in our today. While we did not burn witches in this part of Pennsylvania, yet some folks have peculiar and deep-rooted beliefs, as the following article will show. It is copied just as it appeared in an old publication. And then this is the article they were speaking of. Since the introduction of free schools, witches and all kindred workers in the black art have become scarce, and few people acknowledge a belief in them. 3/4 of a century ago, the case was different. Every neighborhood had its witches and witch stories, supported by evidence that could not be gainsaid. In these respects, Old Paxtang Valley was fully abreast of its neighbors. As an instance, we will give one of the best authenticated, but by no means the most marvelous, of the innumerable stories told and believed at the firesides of our ancestors. More than 100 years ago, John Wilson and his wife Jean owned and were living upon a farm near the present Rutherford Station. Mr. Wilson was a prominent man in the valley, and one whose truthfulness was unquestioned. He was also somewhat skeptical in his views of witchcraft. He loved a good horse and always kept a fine team. On one occasion, several of his horses refused to work and acted in a very strange and unaccountable manner. This, as an aside, would be very offensive to Pennsylvania Dutch. If anything refuses to work, there's something wrong. Work is held above all things to these people. Within the next fortnight, these horses, one after another, died without any apparent cause. The neighbors attributed it to witchcraft, and Mr. Wilson reluctantly came to the same conclusion. But as he had hitherto been a doubter, and did not wish to avow his conversion until he had put the matter to the proof, he resolved to privately work a spell, which it was popularly believed would bring the witch to light. This spell consisted in certain incantations, together with the consuming of vitals of the victim with fire. This was supposed to torture the corresponding vitals of the witch, that she would come speedily and beg for mercy. Accordingly, when the last horse died, Mr. Wilson, after removing the skin and hanging it in the loft of an old building below the house to dry, conveyed the carcass to a retired spot in the woods, kindled a fire, and with the proper ceremonies laid the requisite parts of the animal upon it and awaited results. Whilst John was thus employed, Jean, who was in absolute ignorance of his whereabouts, was somewhat startled by the rapid approach from the ravine west of the house of a man and 2 women, with their tongues hanging out and panting like dogs. The strangers rushed into the house and called for water. Jean pointed to a large bucketful upon the table and told them to help themselves. They drank greedily all that was in the bucket, then hurried to the door and stood for a moment sniffing the air, as if searching for a scent, then ran down to the old building below the house, climbed up to the loft, and began licking the blood from the flesh side of the hide.
Ooh, vampires, I like it. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
After having been some time thus engaged, they seemed satisfied, came down, and disappeared up the ravine from whence they had come. Mr. Wilson's fire, after burning brightly for a time, died out, and no witch appearing, he soon came after to the house, disgusted with his ill success and more skeptical than before. But upon hearing Jean's account of what had taken place in his absence, he perceived that his over-thoughtfulness had caused his failure. If, when a spell of this kind is worked, the witch can obtain some of the blood of the victim and drink it, the fire within is quenched and the spell broken. Blood enough for this purpose can be obtained from the skin of an animal that has not previously bled, and if Mr. Wilson had placed the hide beyond the reach of the witches, he would have had them in his power. This story was told by Mr. Wilson himself, and none ever doubted his word. Later generations, unable to discredit Mr. Wilson, has endeavored to explain by asserting that Jean was mistaken as to the actions of the man and two women who came into their kitchen. This explanation is a very ungallant one, but is also very old and a very common way of accounting for most of the errors of mankind.
Wow.
So it sounds like kind of like vampires, maybe werewolves or something, maybe?
I mean, kind of. There are a lot of... So we have these local... they call them hex books, or... so it's folk magic, and there isn't a lot of witchcraft in them. It's like sort of like faith healing more than than that. The most famous one is called The Long Lost Friend, and it's a lot of prayers and faith healing. You know, have stuff like, you know, if you have rheumatism, you know, do this, you know, and it'll give you a little charm to say, and so forth. But in these books are often ways to discover witches. So these charms to bring witches out, you know, are in the culture, are in the, you know, the Pennsylvania Dutch culture, and they're in these books. So you will find, you know, with not only how to you know, cure warts or whatever, you know, whatever these different charms are. You know, on the same page, the next charm will be like how to discover a witch. And this, you know, this will turn whatever hex the witch has put on you will turn it against them, or you will know the witch because they'll show up at your house the next day and like begging for water or something like this. So that part of the story is consistent with, you know, what we find in these local, you know, as I said, called them so-called hex books. So yeah, I don't know. It's very, very strange. It's a very weird,
strange one. Yeah,
weird story of them coming in and licking the blood from the horse hide, though.
Yeah, because I was kind of actually half expecting it to take like a rabies turn, and like, you know, they were super thirsty, and I was kind of, as the story went on, I was like, are they like rabid from rabies, and are they going to? Because I was expecting like a turn where they might, you know, vomit up the water after they've drank it, kind of thing. But you know, when you take all the rest of the story, the rabies doesn't really make sense, you know.
No.
I think all that magic stuff, man, is very interesting, isn't it? Really, like.
It's a strange one though. It's like just even that image of the two people arriving, panting, their tongues sort of hanging outside of their mouths, and then licking the blood. It does bring to mind an element of midnight mass, as we kind of touched on earlier. You know,
it's
for
very
sure.
disturbing. Yeah, Rob,
it really is.
I'd be interested if you could ask your grandparents.
Yeah,
did they have? Maybe you know. Did they have like a similar sort of folk magic, faith healing tradition there?
I think it was more common in rural Ireland.
It would have been, yeah.
And I think, my granny is very superstitious, even still. Like she would definitely entertain a lot more stuff. I think recently she said, like, I can't remember actually what happened, but she used to always get like a sty on her eye.
Oh, yeah.
And like some woman showed up to the house and she was like, oh, I can't remember most of it's on butchering it, but essentially I think she brought some item of my granny's, like some like cotton or something or whatever, and tied it to some tree or did something weird with it and brought it back to my granny and, you know, said, oh, is this and that's been done to it. And my granny says it worked and it removed her sty. I must actually ask her what happened, so I'm not butchering that story, but she often says it. She said, "Oh, that's how I like," and she'll say, matter of fact, she's like, "That's how I cured my sties." Was this woman showed up at the house and said, "Oh, I know what'll cure them," and goes off and finds like does some type of ritual with the item, gives it back to my granny. My granny puts it on her eye overnight or something, or like ties it to her eye overnight or something, and she doesn't get styes anymore, or at least that's what she says.
There is very, very good evidence for folk magic and hypnotism curing warts. They're extremely effective. They've done studies on it. They don't know the mechanism. In Appalachia, the so-called grannies, these women that do this folk magic, will buy warts from people. They will they'll give a kid a couple quarters
bag
or something.
Of warts.
Yeah, here, I'm going to buy that wart off you, and it works. These kids, the warts go away, hypnotism works very well for warts as well. So I'm imagining it's a similar process, between the two things happening.
And as well, there's the psyche and the power of the mind as well plays into it, which is another totally untapped, perhaps almost paranormal type of thing where there's parts of our mind that we probably haven't even tapped into properly and harnessed yet, because even placebo is such a powerful thing,
Well,
so
one of the things about placebo that's even more interesting is most of the times people talk about placebo, they talk about sort of more mood-based illnesses, you're feeling depressed, your exercise is as good as antidepressant, which is as good as a placebo, sugar pill. But there are studies out there that show people who actually get placebo surgery, and I don't know enough about this. It's in a book called You Are the Placebo, but it's basically, let's say you get knee surgery, but they don't actually do anything.
Yeah.
But your knee somehow manages to work again because you believe that a surgery has taken place, basically.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's working. Now, again, I'd need to, I kind of want to almost reference check myself there. I know I've definitely read about physical placebo, if you like, something that's on the body rather than the mind, and it working. And I'm pretty sure it's in that book, You Are the Placebo.
I've heard of it though. I've seen a thing, Eamon, where it was on, and I think this might have been more in the sort of charlatan-y sort of hoaxy type of thing, but I think there was a guy, maybe he got in trouble for it, but he was doing that kind of thing where he was doing fate like surgeries where he was saying, "Oh, I'm going to go into you with my hand and I'm going to remove whatever illness there is." I want to say that was someone high profile. I wish it could really come to my brain right now, but it is a done thing, even without sort of a medical side of it, where maybe you might go into a hospital and pretend you had surgery, but there are people that say that they do it.
I think these were legitimate studies that were carried out, as far as I'm aware. Again, I just don't have the book in front of me to actually reference it. Yeah. But I gave it a lend to one of my mates. But even if I did, it's massive, so I probably wouldn't be able to find it. But it's very, because obviously your mood is quite, or at least we know it's very much affected by the environment, by what's going on around us, by the people we have around us. And I think the body is probably quite similar. It's just we aren't as aware of it, if that makes sense. So I do believe, I would tend to believe, even as you were talking there, Tim, about the hex books. There's many books out there that talk about, like, if you have a certain pain in a certain part of your body, it's a physical manifestation of some sort of, not necessarily a mental illness, but maybe a mental characteristic, let's say. So if you don't feel you can speak up, you might find yourself getting sore throats a lot and things like that, which I think are very interesting. And a lot of psychologists would argue that much of the stuff that comes in the physical body is from the subconscious kind of finding its way to the surface.
I believe it. We've talked about it on the podcast before, but I would class myself as having like a sort of middle tier anxiety that happens a lot. And for me, it's a lot of health anxiety, even though I'm a healthy person. But I've had instances in my life before where I thought I was a lot sicker than I was. And in hindsight, it turned out to be anxiety.
But your body feels,
yeah, my body
feels that.
My body literally felt it, like physically felt it, to the point of where you know, the only reason I noticed that it was something that was more in my head was because there was like drastic changes in how I would feel based on where I was. Like I had a really bad panic attack and I ended up in the hospital because it was the first time I ever had one. Didn't know what the fuck was going on. And after having that, as soon as I got there, I felt fine. And I was like, oh, hang on. Like that was the first time I was
What's
like,
going on here?
hang on here now a second. What is happening here? And then I noticed that like over time as well, even like say with a doctor's visit sometimes. And I'm like, oh, wait, I'm just talking myself into this doctor's visit at the minute. I'm not actually, I think I'm fine. As soon as I walk into the room, I feel better almost. So I feel it in a sort of a reverse sense, I think, you know?
Because you're getting reassurance. Because when you go to the hospital or you go to the doctor and they tell you, oh, there's nothing wrong with you.
You're like,
and you get totally. It's so like anxiety sort of, you know, what would you say? Anxiety, the sequel. But you, you'll get a reprieve from that for a certain amount of time. Because like, oh, the doctor said I'm fine. 12 hours pass and they're like, yeah, but what if the doctor didn't? And it doesn't. And it,
what
you know,
if he knows I'm anxious and he's just saying it?
What does he know?
Yeah, exactly.
So
the thing about placebos, though, and I think when we talk about this stuff is, I think people, because we're you know, generally as a society we consider ourselves, you know, modern and science based and so forth, and people think of placebos as a negative thing, but I would say if that cotton cured your grandmother's sty, that's a great thing.
Yeah,
no matter how it happened.
Yeah.
If
I'll get the details. I'll send them to you, and then you can do a follow up on a Strange Familiars, a little brief thing about what it actually was. So because I'm sure people listening are curious about the actual process.
It is absolutely. I know your dad. The first time I ever got a sty in my eye, your dad made a remedy for me, Rob.
Oh, did he?
When we were he made like it was like a tea bag wrapped in some stuff.
Nice.
I mean, it didn't work, but like he made it for me. You know, it's a nice thing to do.
A for effort.
A for effort. No, I jest. But it's funny, talking about the superstitious of sort of older Irish women there. This is ringing up because it's based in Clonmel, where my grandmother was from. She wouldn't have been overtly superstitious in terms of talking about it the whole time. But a lot of those older Irish women would have been A, very religious, and then B, there was a lot of stuff about, you know, the pukas, the Irish ghosts, all that sort of stuff. So they were kind of like half pagan and super Catholic, you know, they were kind of blended into one. But I do remember something from my grandmother when she was quite old, kind of coming to the end of her life, when she was in the hospital. She used to talk about she used to talk about her brother. I believe his name was Neroy or something like that. I just can't remember off the top of my head. But he had died very, very young of tuberculosis. And when my father would come to visit her into the hospital, she would talk about how her brother was there and was kind of beckoning her to come, you know, to the next level, the next stage with her. And it was a recurrent thing. And it wasn't sort of doting or dreams or anything. She just had this recurrent thing of her younger brother, who was still the same age as he would have been when he would have passed away. They had to keep him down in a shed at the back of the house because it was such a contagious disease back in those times. But she would talk about this, and in a very kind of an open kind of, oh yeah, my younger brother showed up today, so I think I'm probably not going to be here long. So yeah, she'd be talking about like, all right, so you can take this, you'll get that. There's some money in a pot back here. You know, she's very pragmatic about it. But certainly, it didn't seem strange to her at all, you know? And I think that speaks to the superstitious, the inherent superstitious kind of nature of a lot of Irish women that were around that age.
Half pagan and super Catholic. I think I want to marry this person.
Yeah.
There's lots of them in Ireland are still there for sure. Like,
yeah, that was the only way that they got they wound up getting Catholicism to take over here. Yeah, because our sort of older, you know, ancestors, they were like, no. We need a Christmas tree. We need Samhain. We need all this stuff. But yeah, so we have a lot of sort of pagan stuff mixed in with our Catholicism. Maybe not in, you know, the sort of biblical text or anything like that, right. But certainly there's an Irish sentiment of the ghouls and the god, if you like.
Cool rabies story, since Rob brought up rabies again.
Yeah.
There is a cemetery.
I love rabies, Tim. I'm a rabies enthusiast.
There's there's a cemetery across the Susquehanna River, the Great Susquehanna, in a town called Columbia, which is one of my favorite local towns. And in this cemetery is a very old gravestone, and the gravestone shows a dog biting a hand with like blood coming out of his hand carved. It's just from like fieldstone, just a rock, and somebody like etched this in with a chisel or something. And the story goes is the guy who was buried there, he got bit by either a rabid dog or a wolf. This would have been back when there were still wolves in the area. I'm not sure which. I'll have to look up the story again. But he knew he had rabies. He knew he was going to die, and he carved his own tombstone.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah.
That's pretty dark. I mean, rabies, I really sort of learned about it recently. I sort of dived into rabies facts, and what a horrible way to die. I mean, I don't think people really realize how
it's awful.
Serious rabies is if you catch it. If you have symptoms, it's too late. You're dead.
Yeah.
That's it, game over. And you don't even know if you get it, because most of the rabies, things that carries rabies, like really small bats and stuff, if they bite you, say you're asleep in a hammock, or you're out camping or something, and something at night, like the chances of a rabies bat kind of falling on you and acting crazy is a lot higher than a regular bat, because bats will obviously try and avoid you. Right. But their teeth are so small that sometimes you won't even know you've been bitten. Yeah. And then you might get symptoms for a year later, and then it's too late. You're done. Oh yeah. Game over.
It's too late, it's a death sentence. And I mean, before there was a vaccine, this gravestone's from the 1700s, I think. So no vaccine then. He knew he was going to die. That's the tragic thing, and he carved his own tombstones.
There's a big part of the vampire lore is tied in with rabies. I was reading about this recently about
bloodthirst, and
it's blood, that people have like this huge savage hunger for meat when they have rabies. There's that recessed gums that bring the fang sort of imagery,
insatiable thirst as well, like
insatiable thirst, but then the water makes you sick after a while.
That's right.
And apparently they said that more men used to get rabies. I guess they're probably out in the land more, which would stand to reason. But it makes you kind of it's like, I don't know, diet Cialis or whatever. It made him quite aroused, and that's where they said the Lothario Lavacious kind of idea of the vampire, because vampires are always sexy and stuff like that.
Yeah,
and they reckon that's where it might have come from. So it's a really interesting one to look at. And then all that stuff about burying people, putting the pins in the coffins, burying them outside of town boundaries. They said as well, it was rabies, but they didn't understand rabies. So they were like, how like, we need to get these people away, and this silver will stop them coming back. But really, really interesting stuff.
Hydrophobia, they called it.
That's it.
Back in the 1800s, I think. I think it was on the Monster Fuzz Discord, somebody shared a video of somebody in the late stages of rabies. I couldn't even watch it. I couldn't. It's
brutal.
It's brutal.
Yeah, it's brutal. It's just a horrible way to go. So folks, watch out for the rabies.
Don't get it.
if there's one thing we could tell you, it's watch out for the rabies. Stay away from bats for sure.
I live with them. They're in my house.
Are they really?
Oh yeah. That's my I don't really care that much, but if you wake up and there's one in the room with you, that's you got rabies shots, because like you said, you don't know if they bit you or not. So.
Yeah, that's there's a very funny Irish video that I'll have to send you of a bat that flies into an Irish kitchen, and like they're trying to chase it out. It's pretty funny, but I think as well, because that's the thing. So when bats act out of the ordinary, i.e. they end up in a house and they're acting funny, or they land on you or something, chances are then there's something wrong with them. So definitely be diligent about it and get that rabies shot for the crack.
We have the large brown bat here, which the kind that's in our house. They have a 14-inch wingspan, which is
okay. Wow,
it's quite impressive.
A big bat.
Quite
impressive.
That's
a big bat
when that's flying at your head.
Wow.
But
that is spooky.
I can imagine.
That is spooky. So, have we got anything to add, Tim, for this Halloween seance, this Halloween session that we're having here? Is there anything
Happy Halloween to everybody listening everywhere.
Yeah, I think this was good. I think we might have to make this an annual thing, like a Halloween roundtable.
Happy to do it.
Yeah, I think this would be cool. I think, Eamon, have you got anything you would like to add?
No, just big thanks to you, Tim, first of all, for doing the old collab, man. I always appreciate it when you're on here, when we're on there. It's so much fun. So it's been great to talk to you again. And a big thanks to everybody who's listening, who continues to listen. We really appreciate you so much.
So you guys are at monsterfuzzpodcast.com.
Yeah, and anywhere you want to find us is just Monster Fuzz Podcast or Monster Fuzz on most of the streaming stuff. It's just on the website. It's podcast after it. But yeah, Instagram I think is Monster Fuzz Podcast. All those places. Yeah.
On the most recent Strange Familiars patron episode, we told all of our patrons to basically go become your patrons just to mess with Eamon, so he'd have to record 100 songs.
Oh man, I have no time.
he'd be sweating under all the songs. That's pretty funny. Yeah, no, it's cool doing this. This little Halloween thing is cool. Like, I hope it gets people in the mood. Obviously for yourself as well as us. It's probably our busiest time as podcasters because we kind of have to step it up. It would be rude of us not to, because it's literally what we spend all year talking about. So when it does come around, I mean, what are we going to do? Fade off? No, we have to do. We've done a lot now this month for Halloween. Like we've put out, I think 4 or 5 episodes this week. So it's an intense haul. Like, but it's always fun to talk about, and those stories were great.
Yeah, really enjoyed them.
All right, so it's a date 1 year from now.
Yep.
Right.
And also before we duck, you have to come on for the Alba Twitch episode soon, actually. So your listeners have that to look forward to too, because we need to get into the Alba Twitch, and you know all about it.
Yeah, I will hit you with an outline for that. So
sounds good.
Yeah,
sounds good.
Awesome.
Right. See you guys.
All right.
Take care. Bye bye.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Again, if you want the Witch Cloud project, you go to stonebreath.bandcamp.com and you can get it there. Besides the books, you can just get the download if you want as well. But I'm begging everyone to get the book. It's really meant to be a book.
It's a set.
Yeah, a book and audio project together.
You wouldn't just buy half of a book.
No, exactly.
You don't want to get the 2 DVD set and the 1 DVD's missing.
And you get my illustrations in the book and, the patch and the sticker and everything. I'm very excited about this project. So happy Halloween again. We will be closing with my song, To Sleep with Skeletons. I mentioned that story to Rob and Eamon about the nun scolding me for walking through the graveyard. I've told it on the podcast before, but I mentioned it to them again. And To Sleep with Skeletons is a song I actually wrote about that. So it's pretty much all true. I changed the name of the nun. Actually, I just didn't remember her name. So the name of the nun in the song kind of fit in the lyrics there. So that's what we'll be closing with tonight. It's kind of a Halloween-y song. Thanks again, everybody, for your support. Thanks for listening to Strange Familiars. Strange Familiars is a production of Dark Holler Arts, music, books, art, podcasts, and more. Intro and background music is by Stone Breath. If you want to hear more Stone Breath or purchase music by Stone Breath, you can go to stonebreath.bandcamp.com, which is also where you can pick up The Witch Cloud, episode 300 project. Strange Familiars is on Facebook, facebook.com/Strange Familiars, where you can join the Strange Familiars gathering group. We are on Instagram @Strange Familiars, and you can always find us on the web at strangefamiliars.com. And of course, if you want to support the show, you can become a patron at Patreon, patreon.com/Strange Familiars.
Little Jimmy's haunted by the voices of the dead. His brother likes to tell him that it's all up in his head. His mother kneels and prays, these words are never said. But little Jimmy hears the voices of the dead. Little Jimmy listens to the sound of Sabbath speech. Kneeling on Sunday, he hears it from a priest. But But lying in his bed, a blacker talk is cast, and wish his words now chill like icy drafts. Jimmy spends his time walking through the graves. Sister Anna catches him all for his soul to save. She tells him he will fall down into coffin grim, to lie with the skeleton's arms around him. This is no deterrent for a boy who hears a ghost calling from the earth below, a single voice, a host. He sits among the headstones singing little songs, while his mother mutters, something here is wrong. Little Timmy's haunted by the voices of the dead. His brother likes to tell him that it's all up in his head. His mother kneels and prays, these words are never said, but little Timmy hears the voices of the dead.